So you want to own a driving school. Demand that's genuinely built into law, since most states require some form of certified instruction before a teenager can get a license, healthy margins on paper, and a business that seems almost immune to changing consumer tastes. Teenagers have needed to learn to drive for 100 years, and they'll need to learn tomorrow, too. Here's the shift that's quietly rewritten this business over the last decade. In most states today, the classroom portion of driver's education, the hours of theory instruction that used to fill a physical room, has moved online, and it's now dominated by a small number of national platforms. One major platform is approved in 14 states. Another operates in more than 30. Together, a handful of app-based companies have captured the theory instruction revenue that used to belong entirely to the local driving school down the street, leaving many local operators competing only for the smaller, lower-margin behind-the-wheel portion, and in a growing number of cases, receiving those very customers as a paid referral from the same national platform that just sold them the classroom course. By the end of this video, you'll know what it actually costs to start a driving school, why insurance alone can consume more of your cash flow than almost any other expense, how a handful of app-based classroom platforms quietly became the customer acquisition engine for local instructors nationwide, and what that shift actually does to the economics of owning this business today. Owning a driving school isn't one business anymore. It's three, and the difference between them has become the whole story. Version 1. The full-service local school. Classroom instruction and behind-the-wheel lessons both delivered in person. The traditional model this industry ran on for decades. This version still exists, but it's shrinking as more states shift the classroom requirement online. Version 2. The behind-the-wheel only operator. A leaner business model built entirely around in-car instruction, skipping the cost of a physical classroom altogether because the state now allows, or students simply prefer, completing the theory portion through an online provider before ever showing up for a driving lesson. Version 3. The National Online Platform. A technology company, not a local instructor at all, that delivers the state-approved classroom curriculum through an app or website across a dozen or more states at once, and increasingly refers or partners with local behind-the-wheel instructors as an add-on service rather than competing to provide it directly. Minimal home-based operation with a single used vehicle can start for as little as $15,000 to $25,000, covering the vehicle itself. A mandatory dual brake installation running around $1,000, initial commercial insurance, and basic state licensing. A more typical mid-sized operation running 4 to 5 vehicles requires somewhere between $110,000 and $215,000 in total startup capital, with most of that tied up in the vehicle fleet itself. If your state still requires a physical classroom, add the cost of leasing and outfitting a dedicated training space, commonly $800 to $3,000 a month depending on your market, a facility cost that a behind-the-wheel only operator simply avoids entirely. Here's where the numbers become genuinely revealing. Net profit margins for a single-location driving school typically run 10 to 20%. With well-run, established operators reaching 20 to 25%. Disciplined operators who maximize vehicle and instructor utilization can push EBITDA margins as high as 35 to 40%. But the same business, run with poor scheduling and underutilized vehicles sitting idle between lessons, can see that margin collapse below 15%, even while charging identical hourly rates. The two numbers that actually determine which outcome you get are revenue per vehicle hour, which a well-run school keeps above $70, and instructor utilization, the share of paid working hours an instructor actually spends teaching rather than waiting between bookings, which top performers keep above 80%. Instructor pay, typically $25 to $40 an hour, is the largest variable cost in the business, which means every idle hour on an instructor's schedule is pure margin erosion, not just lost revenue. Now for an expense that catches almost every new owner off guard. Commercial auto insurance for a driving school costs dramatically more than personal vehicle insurance because insurers are underwriting the risk of a licensed but genuinely inexperienced teenager behind the wheel. Expect to pay somewhere between $1,200 and $2,500 a month per vehicle, with most states requiring minimum liability coverage of $500,000 to $1 million. Add several hundred to $1,000 more a month in general liability coverage on top. For a lean startup running just 2 vehicles, that can mean close to $1,800 a month in insurance alone, consuming more than 10% of a typical working capital reserve in a single monthly bill before a single dollar of instructor pay, fuel, or rent gets touched. This cost doesn't scale down for a small operator the way other expenses can. A driving school with 2 cars pays close to the same per-vehicle insurance rate as one with 20. Here's the part of this industry that has fundamentally changed the business over the last several years, and almost no one outside it has fully connected the dots. As more states have allowed, or in some cases functionally pushed, the classroom portion of driver's education online, a small handful of national technology platforms have captured that piece of the business almost entirely. One major platform is now state-approved in 14 states, spanning California, Texas, Florida, and a dozen others. A competing platform operates in more than 30 states. Course pricing for the online classroom portion alone commonly runs $15 to $100 revenue that a decade ago would have gone almost entirely to a local driving school's own classroom program. These same platforms increasingly don't stop at the theory portion. Several now offer behind-the-wheel lesson add-ons directly through their own app, referring students to local, independently contracted instructors, often for a referral fee or a revenue share on top of what the platform already collected for the classroom course. The practical effect is that a growing share of local driving instructors' customer flow now arrives through a national app's referral network rather than through their own local marketing and reputation. The business that used to be entirely local, built customer by customer through word of mouth and a school's own advertising, increasingly runs through a national platform's customer acquisition funnel first, with the local instructor providing the labor for the highest touch, hardest to scale part of the process, actually teaching someone to drive a car. The driver education market is valued at roughly $15 billion in 2025 and is projected to grow to somewhere between $22 and $23 billion by 2033, driven by steady demographic replacement of new teenage drivers and, in many international markets, expanding vehicle ownership and stricter licensing regulations. That growth is real, but an increasing share of it is being captured by the handful of national platforms controlling the classroom curriculum, rather than by the thousands of individual local operators actually teaching people to drive. A local operator recognizes early that the classroom portion of the business has permanently shifted online in their state and deliberately builds a behind-the-wheel only operation, skipping the cost of a physical classroom entirely and instead forming direct referral partnerships with 2 or 3 of the major online platforms. Vehicle scheduling stays disciplined, pushing instructor utilization above 80% and revenue per vehicle hour above the $70 benchmark. Because there's no idle classroom rent to cover and every vehicle hour is genuinely productive, this operator reaches EBITDA margins near the higher end of what's achievable in this business, and the referral relationships with national platforms function as a genuinely low-cost customer acquisition channel rather than a threat. Scenario 2. A local operator insists on maintaining the traditional full-service model, classroom, and behind-the-wheel together in a state where most students and parents have already shifted their expectations toward completing the theory portion online before ever calling a local school. The physical classroom sits underused, its rent a fixed cost no longer matched by enrollment. Vehicle utilization suffers too, since fewer students are entering the pipeline through the traditional path this school was built around. Margins compress toward the lower end of the typical range, and within a few years this operator ends up relying on the very same national platforms for behind-the-wheel referrals anyway, just later, with less negotiating leverage, and after years of paying for classroom space that never should have stayed open. So the next time someone describes owning a driving school as a simple, law-mandated business that basically runs itself, the mandated demand part is genuinely true. Someone will always need to learn to drive. But the actual shape of this business has shifted meaningfully over the last decade, away from the local, all-in-one school and toward a structure where a handful of national apps control the classroom curriculum and, increasingly, the customer relationship itself. The driving lesson was never really the whole business. Who owns the classroom curriculum, who controls the referral funnel bringing students to your car, and whether your vehicles and instructors are actually busy or just available, that's the real economics of this business now.